Hello everyone, welcome to my Dead Space remake, hard difficulty, no damage walkthrough. This is chapter 9, Dead on Arrival, and this is a pretty short chapter, but it also introduces by far the most broken enemy type ever introduced in this remake, and it's the Twitchers. So, Twitchers on this game are clinically broken. They don't respond to stuns in the way that you're expecting, and the way the Twitchers were treated in the original Dead Space is they were essentially basic necromorphs, but they just had the ability to move fast because the stasis modules merged with the flesh, and I still don't understand the logic in that. How could a stasis module, which is meant to slow down one's own relative time field, possibly cause these enemies to move even faster when it just merges with flesh? I never understood that. But as I was saying, in the original game, Twitchers, they were essentially basic necromorphs that move very fast, albeit they had a lot more health. But when you shot Twitchers in the original Dead Space, they always flinched. And they weren't so bullshit in that game. But on this game, Twitchers are easily the most broken, overpowered enemy in the game by far. And they don't make any sense. They have the ability to cheat with the way they just deal with you in the combat encounters. So for one thing, the stun systems involved with the Twitchers are very weird. So, you know the technique I mentioned against basic necromorphs where you shoot them once with the plasma cutter and then you melee and then repeat that process by either using another plasma cutter shot and then meleeing or doing like additional melee hits afterwards? Well, for some reason, when you try to do that technique against Twitchers and you shoot the plasma cutter more than once, the game gets very confused as to what its stun HP is, and so there's a lot of inconsistent moments that can happen with the stuns. And not only that, but Twitchers have an absurd amount of life in this game, and it's even more life than what they had in the original Dead Space. And here's a clear example of that absurd HP. So you have to stun this Twitcher right here with the flamethrower, and you'll also delay the other one, but I'm going to fire at least 3 mines at these enemies. And it looks like it killed them, but I have had moments where even after using 3 mines, one of the Twitchers is still alive. That's how insane their health is. When they can take that many mines to actually die, and their stun systems are completely fucked, you have yourself the most broken enemy type by far in this remake. And the game is so rigidly designed with how it wants you to handle Twitchers, because if you're not specifically using the flamethrower against Twitchers, you're gonna have a bad time dealing with this enemy. And that's just another reason why I don't like this enemy. It's not flexible with the way you handle it. Oh, and another thing that makes Twitchers really bad is that before you destroy their stasis module, they're completely immune to stasis. So until I destroy the stasis module that is on its chest, I will never be able to freeze it with stasis. So I've destroyed the stasis module. So it's cool that it slows it down, but it doesn't get stunned for long enough. And you will not believe the amount of limbs you have to dismember, even after getting rid of a leg and a blade. It's still going on. Like, this enemy has more health than the enhanced necromorph. How the fuck does that make any sense? And it's also very confusing because these Twitchers are basically armored soldiers that were on the USM Valor, right? And I mentioned the armored part, but it's strange how these enemies respond to the flamethrower's firewall effect, yet the regular necromorphs that are armored, they don't respond to the stun generated by the firewall effect. How does that make any sense? Oh, and also for this combat encounter right here, you'll want to stay on this side of the room because there aren't any spawn points. All of the enemies will spawn from the other side of the room. So there's going to be a pregnant, and once it's dead, there are going to be a bunch of lurkers. So I use one of the blades to my advantage, and I tried to kill this one with the mine, but somehow my mine didn't connect because the pregnant's body got in the way. And you might have noticed as well that there was the R1 prompt to disable the mine. That got me fucked a couple of times in this chapter, where I'm trying to use multiple mines in rapid succession, but Isaac ends up disabling the mine instead. And it's really retarded that they didn't consider that players might need to use multiple mines in rapid succession to deal with very broken enemy types and very beefy enemies. But I've dealt with the Exploder, and after the Exploder is dead, 3 Twitchers spawn, I believe. Yeah, I think it's 3 Twitchers. But you need to go to this side of the debris and then use the firewall effect to stun these Twitchers. It'll take 2 uses of the firewall in order to kill Twitchers, but while they're being stunned by the firewall effect, you can take shots at them with the plasma cutter and just go for their limbs. But you gotta be careful when you do that, because sometimes this allows them to get out of the firewall effect. It's very rare, but it can happen. And also, if you're thinking about dismembering the legs on the Twitchers and you think that slows them down, it doesn't. They still move just as fast, even when their leg is dismembered. It's an intentional design choice. It's the same case in the original Dead Space. But Twitchers are just given an absurd amount of capabilities in this game that just allows them to cheat. And that's why they're the worst enemy type in the game. And with how rigidly designed they are, where the game practically forces you to use only one specific weapon to deal with them, there is just no flexibility provided with how you deal with Twitchers. And what if you didn't have flamethrower fuel? Like, if you tried to use the pulse rifle mines against Twitchers, they just run through the mines. I mean, sometimes they'll get stunned, but it's very inconsistent. And with how fast Twitchers move, the possibility of you getting hit by your own mines is very high if you aim directly at the Twitcher while it's moving at you. And when it comes to the plasma cutter, the only time you'll ever want to use the plasma cutter against Twitchers is when you're only dealing with a single one. And the way I normally handle Twitchers with the plasma cutter is I shoot them once, and then as soon as they get close to me, I melee them, because again, that's the only way to trigger the stun consistently on the Twitchers. I then shoot them once with the plasma cutter again, and then melee them when they're back in a neutral state to repeat the stun loop. And I basically try to go for the stasis module and freeze them and then take off their limbs. I mean, another thing you can do is while they're stunned by the stasis field generated when you destroy their stasis module, you can try to dismember one of their blades and knock them over with the blade that you picked up, and then try to aim for the other blade. So if you destroy both of the blades that the Twitcher has, it will die, because that's just the case with every single enemy on this game. If you destroy their weaponized body parts, they will just die completely. So that's what I can do against the Twitchers as well, but you're probably better off just aiming for their legs and dismembering them, then going for the blades. On this room right here, move this crate out of the way, and then activate the elevators. Do not activate the fire suppression system, because the fire here will instantly kill these leapers. I didn't realize this, and so I tried to use the flamethrower right here, but it wasn't necessary. That being said, though, I still recommend putting the flamethrower down, because with how untrustworthy this game's mechanics are, you'll probably need to rely upon the stun lock generated by the flamethrower to ensure that the leapers actually get hit by the fire correctly. But that's all done, and we're nearing the end of this chapter. Like I said, this is a very short chapter, and we have just witnessed the unceremonious death of Hammond. The entire scene where Hammond dies is so stupid, not just with the screenplay, but also with the voice acting. Hammond's voice acting is terrible when he's dying. But when you enter this mess hall, 2 Twitchers are going to spawn. You don't have to worry about a time limit for the sequence. I think you have unlimited amount of time to just escape the Valor. But I hugged the right-hand side, and I used the flamethrower to stun these 2 Twitchers. I didn't expect that second Twitcher to spawn so close to me, and I somehow managed to not take any damage from my firewall, so that was very fortunate for me. But there aren't any enemies left, although I believe there may be enemies following you when you get to a certain room, like when you get to the barracks area. Because when I was escaping this area, I noticed that Isaac looked to his right, because that is a thing as well. Isaac will actually look at obstacles, he'll look at interactables, and he'll look at enemies. So watch this. You see how his head turned to the right? So I believe he's either looking at an explosion or he's looking at an enemy, and I did hear like an enemy sound effect, which is why I turned around. So I don't know if he's being followed during that moment. But either way, escaping the Valor is very simple, and that is the end of this chapter. But here are a couple of bloopers. So this right here is what the Divider is like when you don't dismember its leg first. Like, this HP doesn't make any sense. How could it possibly resist the flamethrower when all of its individual body parts die very fast from the flamethrower when they're separated? And look, they're still alive. How the fuck is that possible? That's what I'm saying. Like, the logic in how the Divider's HP works makes no sense. And this right here is where the scripting on this Twitcher dying completely fails, because it doesn't run into the lasers for some reason. And then this right here is where the absurd HP on the Twitchers becomes known. And here's Phantom Rain. So he managed to hit me without touching me, which is bullshit. And this part right here, I don't recall what exactly happens. Oh yeah, that. You see that? Because I fired multiple plasma cutter shots at that guy and I tried to melee him, the melee didn't trigger the stun correctly. Like, the stun HP systems for this enemy are completely out of whack. And then this right here, watch how absurd this guy's HP is. And he did a death animation, but he's somehow still alive. And from my perspective, it looked like he did the genuine death animation, but apparently he did the animation where he feigns his death, but it didn't look like that to me. And then for this part of the blooper, the brute spawns, but I somehow end up clipping into the wall right next to me, and I stasis him, and then the hitbox screws me, which is bullshit. And then right here is, again, another example of how absurd the HP is for these Twitchers. So, look at this. I'm using the flamethrower effect, and then I'm going to try to use the mines, but he's somehow still alive after all that, and I end up damaging myself with my own mine. And then right here, an exploder spawns behind me. Again, you do not want to be on this side of the arena when you're doing this combat encounter, because shit like that happens all the time. But I want to like this chapter, but the Twitchers just completely ruined this chapter. I have no idea what crack the developers were smoking when they were designing the Twitchers, but they should have had the foresight to realize the repercussions involved with the way they designed the Twitchers on this game. But somehow they didn't. And with that all said, that is the end of Chapter 9. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.